What a great deal. Okay. All right. So I'm just kind of curious, since apparently we're a very small group here. So I'm curious as to what is what's the motivation to attend this topic? Um, you know, as a clinician, is it, do you have family members? Do you have other clients that you're working with that you've noticed maybe struggling with this issue? Are you curious? So if you want it, you can unmute yourself and we can talk about that, or if you want to put it in the chat, you can.
Yeah, Maria, I actually have a question. Are you a veteran?
Yes.
Okay, so I am as well. And so when choosing what room to monitor, I had opted into this one because I was just very curious how kind of being a veteran and then also being a counselor and whatnot had kind of merged into how you practice and this issue at large.
Good question. Okay. All right. Well, okay. So here's a little bit of background on me. First of all, I'll actually use my pronouns interchangeably between she, her, they, and them. There's been many times when I've been, misgendered throughout my entire life anyway. So I'm sure like a lot of us have that experience of doing that. I still do, which I'm okay with, because, it's okay when old ladies chase me out of the women's room. Like, so it's fine. It's like, now it's okay. I belong here. So, anyway, I am a 20-year retired Navy veteran, and I'm also a member and ally of the LGBTQ plus community. I have my own business here in Jacksonville, Florida, and I'm a doctoral candidate in the counselor education and supervision program at National Louis University in the branch in Tampa, Florida. So my research focus has been integrating military culture into counselor education and supervision, and also the integration of LGBTQ plus, awareness and competencies. Those are the things that I think that we really need to bring to the forefront. There's a lot of work out there and a lot of things on multicultural competencies, but I think as we keep going on, and we keep noticing that we can't do a one size fits all across the board. That just doesn't work. We can't just say, okay, this will fit for every certain type of demographic, culture, race, that there's so many nuances and intersectionalities that occur that clinicians need to have more of a broader type of, broader lens, and also a narrow lens when dealing with specific types of populations. So that's been my interest in terms of, trying to do some professional presentations in forums like this on those topics. Okay.
I'll go.
Yeah.
I just in May defended my dissertation Zoom. Apologies, I think at least one of you have heard a little bit of my story. It's a second career for me. My first was in nonprofit administration, and then I decided to go and get a counseling degree. And while in the master's program, I fell in love and decided, given a newfound discovered passion for intersex people in my sexual issues class, that I wanted to really work on trying to improve the state of counseling for intersex individuals and their families. So I went to St. Louis because they had a really good program, and have just, as I said, finished the work on interviewing activists on their particular perspective of intersex life. And I also really wanted to focus on the different communities within the intersex overall umbrella, because depending upon your variation, you have a very, very different experience of life as an intersex individual. I'm also now, as I work toward expanding that dissertation into a book, I'm wearing another hat of trying to develop a practice that is focused on I would have loved to have really been able to focus just on intersex individuals, but I'm getting the sense that given license restrictions, I'm licensed in Florida and I'm licensed in New Jersey, that I'm not going to be able to just serve that population. I feel like there's so few of me that if I could have just focused for intersex individuals, that would have been the best use of my expertise. But there's such a strong overlap with transgender experiences for some of the intersex population that I thought that that would be a second population to focus on. I think trauma is so important to, you know, for just as another theoretical orientation to bring to this. So I'm, you know, I'm very interested in loss, grief, trauma, and how to best serve intersex and transgender people with, you know, with an eye toward those particular issues. That's my story.
All right. Well, congrats on getting there. I hope to get there soon. Hopefully by
Yeah, you
by
will.
next summer.
Here's to you. Here's to you. Hang in there. It does get better.
Right. All right. Thank you for sharing that. That's awesome. We need people doing that type of work, and I appreciate you for doing that, taking that on, and having that passion. Okay.
My name's Leah Boston. My pronouns are she and her. I have a lot of hats on today. On the one hand, I am a member of the LGBT community, identify as a lesbian. I'm also a professional in the community. I have a private practice where I work primarily with LGBT clients, and most of them are transgender. Little by little, kind of, Cynthia, what I have found is at the beginning when I was building my practice, I took whoever walked in the door. And then little by little, I took just LGBT people, and now I'm trying to just take trans people. So as time goes by, you may be able to specialize more. I don't know if that's any help. I was a past president of SAGE and am speaker in 2 of the talks today. So I have a professional identity, but I'm not here actually in either of those. I'm here as the mom of a 33-year-old trans daughter. So I'm actually looking to see what I can learn about my own ambiguous loss.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that. Thanks for being here. I like how you said, and this is true, that, you know, when we first start out and we've hang our shingles somewhere, so to speak, you know, we open the doors. But what I have found personally is they start weeding themselves out in a way. Like what you're supposed to work with starts showing up for you. And then that's what ends up, you know, we end up like kind of pinpointing what our specialties are and what more of our passions are. So that's what it sounds like is happening to those of us who are out there who are doing that. So it does take a little bit of time.
Yes.
But it's, you know, that's the excitement of the journey. I learn every single day from all of my clients, and that's just like an amazing, I think that's like a privilege to be witness to other people's stories and walks. So one of my clients probably about 2 years ago really was the inspiration behind actually creating this presentation. She's a young lesbian woman. She's in her early 20s. You know, of course, pro-LGBT and advocate, you know, out, proud, everything. And she comes into my office, and it took probably about 3 sessions. She had mentioned before that, you know, her father transitioned and is now a trans woman. And she didn't really say much about that in the beginning. That didn't really seem to be what she came to therapy for. But by the 3rd session, she just kind of like broke down in a confession about how horrible she felt, that, you know, she's an advocate, she's a lesbian, that she's, you know, she is so pro, you know, all types of lifestyles, yet she was struggling with her father, who transitioned to her mother, to, you know, so, I mean, she had an affectionate name for him and everything that's now her. So now it's mom. And she, you know, she went off of the, if anyone ever saw that series, but she ended up calling her Mappa, you know, kind of the combination of mom and pop. So she just felt terrible, like she was doing something wrong and betraying not only, you know, her mother now, but her, you know, herself, the community, and everything. And she was really just kind of struggling where to put all these pieces, because she felt like her relationship shifted from when he was dad and she had a certain type of relationship with him there, and now there's mom. And I don't, she didn't know what to do with that. And so that really kind of, that struck me, and I'm like, that's a real thing. So I started doing research on ambiguous loss and seeing if there was anything out there with transgender families. And I just kind of threw a couple of things together in order to get this information out there. So that was my, basically my inspiration. And that's part of where I say, every single day I learn from my clients. I learn more about what needs to be done out there, which also really fuels me and motivates me to just kind of keep going and keep doing advocacy work and keep doing, you know, professional presentations and, you know, work on my own personal dissertation and stuff to get through the program, and also have influence on, you know, counselors in training, because that's ultimately my goal, is that, you know, we need to be there to train, you know, the young ones out there who are getting ready to come out into the field as well. So that's kind of the beginning of where this came from. All right. All right, so basically the learning objectives for today are to be able to identify and educate students, supervisees, and clients on ambivalent guilt reactions and ambiguous loss as it relates to families with transitioning loved ones. Also, to be able to demonstrate the use of the relation tree as an experiential approach to processing grief as it relates to ambivalent feelings and ambiguous loss, and also be able to describe the process of identifying perceived losses related to the transitioning family member and guide clients to reauthor their family story. Okay, so I also want to note that this presentation is applicable to the emotional challenges family face when any changes occur related to a loved one's sexual orientation or gender identity. So, you know, I'm going to say I think we live in a time where it's becoming more and more okay for younger people to start exploring who they are and what that you know, what that means for them. And you know, families have to deal with that at an earlier age, where maybe in the past it was like once a family member was an adult, then maybe they would come out as something, you know, different or specific in terms of like letting their family know. But then there's so much struggle that happens between that point and getting there. So now we have like younger people, if you know, middle school and high school, people are coming to terms with that, and families have to deal with that as well. And there are feelings that come up about that. And what I know is that it doesn't always come from, you know, I think the misconception is that it comes from a place of, you know, non-acceptance for the person, but what it really lies in, and what I've discovered, is more about the grief and loss process that happens about the transition, and what does that mean for the family and relationships, because that's really where the core thing is. It's about the meaning of that, and then there's a whole bunch of other things that go on top of that in terms of, okay, what does it mean, and you know, how society going to respond to that, and et cetera. So there's so many different nuances in terms of how to deal with the loss and the grief that accompanies this thing particularly. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the family perspective. So if we talk about ambivalence, it's the state of having mixed feelings or contradictory ideas about something or someone. If we talk about ambiguous, it's more unclear or capable of being understood in two or more different ways. So we just kind of going to merge those two together in this particular topic here. So in the 70s, Dr. Pauline Boss coined the term ambiguous loss. She said that human relationships can be ruptured indefinitely by ambiguous loss, causing trauma and frozen grief. So she came from it from the perspective of, let's say if you have a family member who ends up missing or is murdered, or there's no closure that ever happened in reference to the relationship, and there's an unknown. I don't even know what happened to it. I don't know how to feel about it. How can I have closure, like in terms of missing persons? Like, are they still out there? Are they not? Are they alive? Are they not? Or if there was like a sudden loss, from somebody who was murdered or killed, or through an accident or whatever, there's also that piece. Like, it's an abrupt type of grief and loss type of trauma that occurs, and people struggle with that. So there's also the part where if you have a family member, let's say you have a family member who suffers with dementia or Alzheimer's, like there's this shift that occurs in the person that they are. My father had Alzheimer's, okay, and it was a struggle to have to deal with the fact that this is the man I knew him to be, and now this is what I see unfolding, and this rapid deterioration of his cognitive abilities, and it's a struggle. It's hard, and there's so many mixed emotions that go into that. Of course, I love my father, but I cannot stand these things that are happening, that are unfolding in front of me. So that it all applies to this perspective of how do we deal with these ambivalent reactions that we have in reference to things that are ambiguous, that we don't know quite where to put them in. So uniquely, ambiguous loss that's experienced in families with transgender family members. Okay, I'm going too fast now. That experience includes the family member being present. However, there are very distinct changes that both intertwine and in the past, present, and future. And there's also this thing where we need to kind of untangle that as well. Like, what do we do with all that? We're going to learn how to do that today, which is pretty cool. All right, so I just wanted to go ahead. There's a couple of things that I found out there with people talking about what their own personal experiences have been with their transgender family members. So with this particular instance, Mary Moss says, my daughter Grace passed away in September 2010. There wasn't an obituary, there wasn't a funeral, there wasn't a casket or even a body to put in it. No one sent me sympathy cards, no one brought me casseroles. But that wasn't because no one cared, it was because my child was still alive. That's pretty powerful. Like, what do I do? There's a loss of something. There's a loss. This person's still here that I love and care about, but they're not there the way I uniquely remember, and I've raised this person up to this point. Now what? So it relates to the transitioning of a loved one that involves physical and psychological presence. So there are changes that occur. It's like, okay, so what I do with this? I see you here, but you're not who you were yesterday, who I thought you were yesterday. Of course, for the transgender person, that's who they always were. It's like, I'm dying to get out of here. I want to get out of here, and I want to become fully who I am. But it's not the perception of what the family member is experiencing there. Okay. So Jessie Sage says, what I couldn't talk about as an intersectional feminist, trans advocate, and academically trained gender scholar was that what it felt like to mourn the loss of a child that's still alive. That's pretty heavy, like, okay, like this is really what is happening. And then there are feelings about having those feelings about what's happening. So not only do our clients struggle with the thing itself, with the ambiguous loss, but then having feelings about having those feelings, which interfere with the process of gaining grieving and gaining an acceptance and being able to move on. Okay, So Mary Moss also said, I distinctly remember crying one Saturday afternoon in bed, mourning the loss of my daughter. Grace came in and hugged me. Mom, if this is going to be so hard for you, I won't do it, she said. I looked into her eyes and I saw such fear. I knew she needed to transition to alleviate the pain in her heart, but she was willing to keep going through that pain to spare me pain. I thought about what a great kid I had and about the fact that what I loved was her heart and soul and not her gender. So these are just kind of the experiences that, parents of transgender, their transgender children are experiencing, like they're coming to terms with. So it's, what is left over? There's so much left over after a person transition the physical form. They are still who they are. They're just going to become more fully who they are. So, I mean, I think this is so powerful in terms that, and I experience this with many of my clients that I work with transgender persons, that they're more worried about how their family is going to deal with it. And so they're like, no, I got to do it the right time. No, I'm worried about how they're going to react. No, I don't want them to feel bad. It's all about, it comes from a place of compassion, but then it's also restricts them from being able to step past that as well. So this is definitely a real issue that surfaces in these families with transgender family members. Okay, so some of the basic simple goals for using the relationship tree. It's basically to facilitate the process of pain that's associated with the perceived loss in relation to the transitioning family member. It's also to encourage clients to tell their stories of the relationships. Like, we honor, tell us the stories. Like, let's give you a nice, safe space to be able to honor and celebrate all that has happened up until this point. That doesn't go away. We don't erase the memories and the experiences, because it's mostly the experiences. If we can just kind of dissect out that it was really about experiences. It's not about, what the person was wearing that day or any other types of particulars. It's about what the shared meaning of these experiences are. So you're giving your clients a safe space to allow those feelings to surface, and also allow them to enhance their insight into their own concept of loss. How can they look at that in a different way? Also to help clients normalize their mixed feelings about the transitioning loved ones and create balanced views of their losses. And also finally to facilitate the client's recognition and deconstruction of challenging thinking about the perceived losses related to the relationships, and empower them to construct new stories based on strengths and hope. You're going to get a chance to do that right here today. You're going to identify someone that, or a specific person, or yourself if you want to, that I'll explain that later, in order to know what this would be like if you were going to use this in a clinical session. You're going to have a chance to experience what that feels like here today. Okay, so Jessie Sage says, being the mother of a trans kid means having to wrestle and come to terms with the expectations that you had and what these expectations tell you about your own gendered socializations. As we all know, okay, computer sensitive. As we know that we do live in a very heteronormative society, no matter how progressive many parts of our society have become. So when this happens in a family where, there's the evolution of the transgender person coming to terms with themselves and trying to find their peace in the family, there's also this, wow, I had all these other expectations. I visualized, a daughter was born to me, and I visualized this path, like she's going to meet a husband and get married and give me grandkids and all this other stuff. So they're coming to terms with all of that as well. Like, what else is associated there? Like, okay, now I'm not going to be a grandmother. Like, it's going to go straight down into the pit of, I'm never going to experience these things, and it's tied into that. So part of our jobs of, as clinicians is how do we help them restore that? Because just because if your daughter is it ends up being a trans man, there are all these other things that can unfold and happen as well too, depending on what their life path is. And they're all, we don't necessarily lose things. It just kind of changes shape a bit. So that's where our job comes in, as far as restoring what is happening there and helping them to come to terms with what that may look like in the future. So far, so good. Is this making sense? Okay. All right. Okay, so here's the first piece of creating the relationship tree. It's the art therapy piece. It's created by N. Lynn Peterson to fulfill an assignment in a graduate course on grief and loss. It addresses grief and loss associated with complicated relationships. It's designed for group work, but it also works well in individual counseling. And also now it also works if you're doing virtual counseling as well. So I just want to throw that out there too, and I'm going to show you how you can do that. There's multiple ways you can do that, but I'm going to show you a neat little thing later. All right, so it's a creative expression that can restore feelings of power and acceptance. It also helps to raise objectivity. It increases insight and gives voice to emotions. It's also a safe expression of difficult emotion, thoughts and feelings that may seem objectionable to verbalize. It also fosters a holistic view of relationships by encouraging clients to experience the full range of their feelings through a visual representation. Have any of you had an experience with using any type of art in your counseling sessions as a way of kind of bridging a gap between? Okay, well, this is a very simple way to do that. We don't have to be like certified art therapists in order to use this exercise. It's a very simple exercise. Okay. So the next piece, well, before we get to the next piece, Mary Moss also said there wasn't a funeral, instead there was a birth announcement. I gave birth to my child again, but this time in the correct gender. So this is already starting the restoring of the transgender family member. So it's not so much of like, it's dead and buried and lost. It's more like, okay, we are having another birth. We are having another celebration. There is this whole new life. We can celebrate what we had before, but there's also this new celebration that can occur in this new, in this new way of being for the family member, and also what it means to the family. So that's the narrative therapy piece. It's basically being able to tell the story of the relationship tree. So the art piece is putting all the different leaves on the tree, and we're going to get into what those, what would be on those leaves. But the narrative therapy piece, it's a postmodern counseling approach that was developed by Michael White and David Epstein. Individuals continually create stories about their experiences. We just do that on a natural, in a natural way. Everyone does that. And if anyone's familiar with some of Brene Brown's work, she does a lot of research on people's experience of things. We constantly tell ourselves a story of what is happening. We also come to realize we're not always telling ourselves the accurate story of what's happening. Sometimes we limit our view on what is actually happening. So it's like, okay, I'm going to look at, if I only look at it this way, from this very narrow viewpoint, I'm not leaving room to say, is there more possible to the story than just this one thing that I'm looking at? And for those of us who are clinicians, that is part of our job, is to be able to be the observer, to say, okay, what about this part? And actually facilitate our clients trying to come up with what are the different parts of that story. So there's also with narrative therapy, there's interpretation of the events that can be positive and empowering, or debilitating and painful. So we help to deconstruct any of the assumptions and beliefs and engage clients in re-authoring those conversations. It also enables the client to see a transition from a new perspective and empowers clients to craft narratives of success and hope versus fear and despair. Any questions up to this point?
We don't have any in the chat, but obviously it's a small group of us. So if anyone has any questions at this point, throw them out there.
Okay, thank you.
I will say I love the references to Brene Brown because I'm a big fan, and I think like her work on like narrative stuff makes a lot of sense in this context.
Absolutely, thank you. Okay, so it's real simple. You don't need a lot of stuff to do this exercise. So basically some of the materials that are needed to make the tree can be, if you're going to do it in person, or if you wanted to prep ahead, if you were going to do it virtually, you can, you know, any type of paper, poster board, colored markers, pencils, it doesn't matter. There are many variations to creating the tree. You can have the client draw the tree. You can have a pre-printed tree. You could, you know, do paper cutouts with construction paper and paste the tree down and have different leaves that you can base. There's so many different like creative ways to do that. And those ways appeal to different people in different ways. So there's no right or wrong way to create this tree. The most important part of it is just doing the actual exercise. So it, you know, it could just be a stick tree. It doesn't matter. Some people get caught up with like, oh, I'm not a really good drawer, or you know, I can't really draw a tree, or I'm not that artistic, and it doesn't really matter. It's just the magic is in the process of actually doing the exercise. So as always, encourage, and that, you know, they will be amazed at what actually comes out of that, because it's not about what the tree ends up looking like, but there's going to be some very specific, significant things that are going to arise, that are going to be noticed in how they made the tree and where they placed the leaves or what they wrote on the leaves. Okay, so so each leaf is labeled differently with a memory or a milestone. They're placed around the tree. The clinician, group leader, whoever is doing this exercise ends up using prompting questions to serve as a starting point for processing feelings, so that the clients can start drawing out some insights gained from the exercise. And the facilitator will also continue to use prompting questions to help facilitate the reauthoring of the story. Okay, so here, this is pretty neat. A couple months back, I went to the Association for Creative Counseling conference, and this was one of the sessions talked about digital whiteboards and how to use that in our new style therapy of virtual therapy. So I just want to kind of share that real quick. You could use that. You can also use that here with a relationship tree, and you'll see that an example is going to pop up here. Okay, so there are already trees in here. So if you were going to like end up pasting a picture, that was just pasted in here. So you can kind of go, you can go into Google image search. You could write tree, and it'll come up with a million different trees, like real trees. Let's see if I put tree outlines, then you can have that. So if you wanted to actually do this like in a virtual session with your clients, you can walk them through that. You could set up your Jamboard, and you can also do send them a link so that they can screen share that. And there are things that they can put on there too. So you can type in leaves, pick up leaves, or leaf outline. So there's a lot of things you can do. So you can pick that out as well. You can also put the text boxes in. Say the text boxes, you just end up creating a text box, writing it down there, and writing down what you need to at that point in time. And the only drawback is that there's limited color for this, but that's okay. It's really not about the color. It's more about what is coming out. What are they discovering as part of their tree? So I thought that was a pretty cool thing. It's also a good option. So, okay. Any questions on the digital whiteboard? Okay.
There are not. We're good.
Awesome. Okay. All right. So here's the experiential part for you guys. This is where I'm going to encourage you to grab a piece of paper. Let me see what else I have. I'm also going to put, let me pull this up real quick. I think I could put a file in, I can add a file to the chat. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe you should be able to like copy and paste links or drag and drop, depending on what kind of file.
All right, let me try and drag and drop. Yep.
Oh,
okay. There. So this is a worksheet. So this basically has a pre-printed tree on there. So I'll put that on my screen real quick just to show you. And listen, like I said, the whole thing is about just doing the experience right now. It's really not about how your tree is going to look. So this is the worksheet. So it has a tree already pre-printed on there. It does a little background on things to consider when drawing the leaves on the tree. And it also has some colors, which it doesn't matter. I say artistic license, you can just pick whatever colors work for you. Pick 3 colors that would differentiate the different things and have your own color code. And then there's the, where you can do observations, reflections, feelings, insights. And then this is the part, the next part, if you wanted to assign it as homework, you could too. And then once they do the first part, they can come back into session and also re-author the story. So you can, there's a lot of different ways you can do it. So you can use it as an homework exercise, or you can actually do it in session and do the whole thing A through Z. Okay. Let's get to the next thing. All right, so what I'd like you to do is if you can go ahead and draw the tree in whatever way, shape, or form you want to. What I want you to think about is if you do have a family member that you're struggling with as far as this is where the applicability of this exercise can go in so many different directions. This one is specifically, we're talking about dealing with transgender identity and those changes within a family. If you have that, great, go ahead and use that there. If you don't specifically have that, what I would like you to do is, if you can look at maybe a relationship that was severed in some way through divorce or some kind of falling out with a family member or friendship, or if a family member may have passed away. I've had people do this on, most recently, one of my clients, her brother died from a drug overdose, a long history of addiction, and had a lot of different mixed feelings about that. To try to help her cope through the grief process, she ended up doing a relationship tree on that. I've had clients do it on their own, changes in their own physicality. Like if you have someone with traumatic brain injury or a wounded warrior who has no longer has functioning or now lost their legs or body parts and has to do something different, that's a big struggle. So they can also do this for themselves. What did they see before? What did they think they lost, and to help them kind of restore and come with a different type of narrative in terms of how to go forward and go through that grief process. So you can decide who you want to do it on. I just encourage you to pick someone and then go ahead and go through the process. Any questions so far?
There's nothing in the chat, but we'll see as people do the exercise if things come up.
That's fine.
And do you think that this would be acceptable to do, like, so non-clinically, in terms of, I think about my parents and my mother in particular, and having tried to make space in the past around the grief that she may be dealing with around my kind of gender identity. And so I'm wondering if you would suggest or think that this would be, you know, a helpful tool for navigating that just amongst lay people.
Okay, so you mean like you would take it to mom and say, hey, let's try to do this?
Yeah, just as a way of kind of communicating, facilitating communication, and really allowing validation for her feelings of loss.
Sure. I mean, I don't see why not. If you know, if you are going to have that conversation and it opens up, like, as long as she's willing,
Yeah.
I don't see why you couldn't say, hey, let's, you know, I got this this neat thing and I just want to sit down and like go through this, because I think that's also part of it too, is like, it's a two-way street. Like, you know, we also need to allow some space for our family members as well, make it safe enough for them to be able to, you know, so that, because it could be a very triggering experience on both ends. Like, you know, I'm upset. It's not because I don't love you, but I'm going through my own shit. I feel, and I'm not dealing with, you know, and I don't know how to deal with it. And then you're dealing with the, like, but this is my stuff, and I don't feel accepted or honored. And so it's like kind of like triggering each other through the whole thing. So yeah, I would say, why not? Why not? Okay.
Because even thinking of that in terms of working then with clients and having them complete this, and then, you know, saying that this may be a helpful thing to do with loved ones around kind of an activity to guide conversation or whatnot around, you know, grief and what's coming up for them. So that's cool.
Sure. Yeah, sure. And yeah, and I also say, if anybody gets stuck with that and it goes into the emotional stuff that would need a professional intervention, then definitely do that. Because, like, you know, counseling 101 is don't do therapy on your family or friends. Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
We're not going to do that. Okay. All right, so that is basically, like, there's the outline of the tree, and some of the things that I want you to consider as far as putting the leaves on a tree. You can put them anywhere that you feel compelled to put them. So on this slide, there's basically shows different things to consider when you're making the leaves on your tree. So I would definitely, whatever, and if it's not in color and it's just in pen and paper, that's fine too. So that doesn't matter. But what's important is what you end up putting in the tree and where you see it falling. So just to give a little bit of an idea, like, as far as positive aspects of a person or the relationship, things you would consider would be like admirable traits and constants, happy events that were shared with loved ones, memories and milestones that were experienced, things that might be neutral but defining aspects of a person or the relationship in relation to the transition. You know, what are some of the, you know, what are some of the things that you might start noticing that will shift, or, you know, what are some of the things that just kind of might not fall on a positive or a negative aspect part. Also, traits that might fall on the continuum from positive to negative. Whatever comes up, you'll decide. You'll be the person who decides where you feel like it falls on that continuum. Maybe you're thinking about shared events that might evoke some mixed feelings, or something that may evoke a mixed feeling that you feel like might be coming up in the future. Some of the things you can also put, like, what are some of those hopes and dreams, and some of the rites of passage, you know, things that have happened, what might happen in the future, and any negative or difficult aspects related to the transition. Sometimes it's a lot of times what I noticed that it's much more about fears and safety concerns. When I've worked with families, I've had actual family sessions with one of my transgender male clients who brought his family in. And I'll tell you, listen, just this goes to the reality of it doesn't matter what our experience, background, or education is. Our feelings are our feelings, okay? And when it comes to close family members that we love and care about, we have a lot of different things that come up. So his mother's a nurse, very, highly educated, very pro-LGBT, etc. Father, a counselor, okay? And yet still, there has been time marked throughout his life prior to his transition as he's like exploring his own identity and, changing in the clothes and the hair, coming out as lesbian at first, and how his parents responded to all of that for him was a very, it was a very kind of damaging thing of not feeling supported, seen, heard. And what it turns out for the parents, they didn't know any other way than to just react out of fear and out of, what we know what society does and how society treats the LGBTQ plus community and, specifically our transgender, brothers and sisters. There's a lot that can go on. And so sometimes that reaction that seems harsh and non-supportive is more about, I am terrified of what's going to happen to you when you go out that door, and are you going to come back? So those are some of the things to be considered of what happens from here. Those are real. We have to validate that as well. Like, that's a real thing. So it's okay to encourage your clients or yourself to look at all of those different things. It's okay to write those down. It's okay to say, where does that fit in there? Is that something that I'm really concerned or that I fear about? So hopefully that makes sense so far.
Maria?
Yes.
I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to be doing from a technical standpoint. Am I writing things into the chat box? Am I writing notes for myself? Or I have this feeling you're asking us to do an exercise, but I'm not really understanding how you want us to do the exercise.
Okay. So if you can grab a pencil and a piece of paper or a pen, I encourage you to draw the tree and identify what family member or some relationship in your life that you feel like there is this type of ambiguous loss. So if you have it, go ahead. Were you going to say something?
Yes. When you showed the virtual drawing board, I wasn't sure if I was supposed to be working in a virtual environment using, a modality. I just wasn't sure where we went off on that in terms of the assignment. So I get it now.
Okay. Yeah, I was just showing you that if you wanted to use the virtual one, you could, that would be okay. But if you just want to do a hand-drawn one today, just for time of, for the sake of, for you, Cynthia.
Let's see. Oh, am I live? I'm live. So the situation, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
The situation for me is one of
the extra things that I do with my clients is when there's that emotional piece that feels like there's an emotional stuck point, is I do this thing called an emotion management process or emotion clearing technique, which is basically employs a neurological type of intervention so that we can remember the story, but we're not stuck in the meaning behind it and what, whatever. Like, what I've noticed is that it's usually attached to, like, if it's attached to your values, we're talking, it's not just a value you created today. That's a lifelong value, like something that you held dearly, and it's something that's really impacting, and then you're struggling with your own looking at self in terms of that, like you're criticizing yourself for how the other person is responding to, maybe because you had to set a healthy boundary with something, but you're also, and then they feel a certain way, and then that feels painful. So we don't have time to actually do that now, but I would like to extend to anyone who's in here today that I will extend a complimentary emotion clearing session for you if you're interested. Okay, it works wonders with my clients. It's not like we have to establish any type of therapeutic relationship because there's no content involved in it. It's more about you thinking about something and me talking you through a visualization process to clear the emotion. So that's like, well, there's only a few of you here today, so hey, you might as well run and grab that bonus if you want to take that with you, and we can do it via Zoom, which is fine. And I'll have my information here at the end if you want to reach out to me, and then we can set up a time to do that, because none of us need to be stuck in some sort of emotional thing that keeps us stuck. And what I've recently went through this specific training, and I've been using it almost every single day, several times a day with my clients, and it's actually working wonders. And it's used for a lot of our basically first responder personnel, military, etc. So, because they deal with a lot of trauma and a lot of things that they get stuck in, and they can't afford to do that because they're going back into things every single day. And so what we're also learning is it's the same process can work for anybody who has that, even if it's like past trauma, or if they've had feelings that, like emotional experiences that have occurred. So I'm just going to throw that out there as a gift, that if anybody who's here today wants to do that, please reach out. I'd be more than happy to do that. And
I will, definitely.
good.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right. So just to go ahead and wrap up, since we've got like 7 minutes left. And if anybody wants this PowerPoint, I will email it to you. You can go ahead and
Yes.
okay. Am I able to put a PDF file in the chat? Were you guys able to get the relationship tree?
I did get the relationship tree, and I was able to open it and everything. So the PowerPoint may be able to be passed on in that way. If not, you can always forward it to us, and we can forward it to those who are in attendance, / it'll be available as part of like the recorded component of this.
Okay.
So everyone should have access who's registered.
Okay, that sounds great. All right. So there are a couple other things as far as like being able to re-author the story. There's more prompts now. These are just kind of suggestions. Once again, they're suggestions. So you can actually, whatever comes up for your client as you're doing this, you go with that, of course. As clinicians, that's what we do. So there's a couple other pages of that. Some of it is like, what would your loved one tell you about that, or about your relationship to one another? Those are things to consider as well. And also, what have you learned from the situation? Because I think that's like an important piece on something that we take away from a situation, even if it's a painful one. All right. So there's also a traditional method. If you want the PowerPoint, it'll be there as well, which is a little bit more of a in reference to grief and loss. Of course, here's my resources that I've used here today. Here's some references. And here's my contact info if anybody's interested in that. And I can just throw my, I guess I could throw my email in there in the chat. Does anybody have any questions, comments, critiques, so I can improve this in the future?
I'm just really happy that you're addressing the issue of ambiguous feelings. I mean, so I so agree with you that traditionally we just think of parents as being supportive or not supportive. And to recognize that even the supportive ones, I mean, you know, I do this work. I had been doing this work before my kid came out. So it's not like, you know, but I still had this feeling like I had been hit by a boulder.
Yeah.
It wasn't a negative, it wasn't negative. It was just, what? How did I miss this?
Sure.
And, you know, so I think it's really, I was very, when I saw your title, I was like, oh yeah, I've got to go to that one.
I'm happy you came. I'm happy all of you came here today. I appreciate that.
I really appreciate the topic too, because there's such a process. You know, I think of what is the difference between the child who, when their parents don't respond to them coming out positively the first time, they then say, I'm sorry, I want nothing to do with you, versus the man who went through conversion therapy and still was able to stay in a space where he wasn't getting what he needed from his parents and was able to be intact enough with himself to allow somebody else to go through a process. And, you know, that we aren't snapshots, you know, we aren't the supportive parent or the unsupportive parent. We're, you know, moving through time and our own values and our own experiences and memories and hopes and dreams, and somebody else is doing that at the same time. So I appreciate the topic because it reminds us to not be so snapshot oriented about these things, that there's a process for all of us in all these areas.
Absolutely.
I really liked narrative therapy, and I just had never seen, your tools are very interesting tools for how to implement it.
We can thank that one grad student who decided to do that in her grad class on grief. So I've been able to kind of pull that together. All right, I'm trying to save that as a PDF right now. So I'm going to do that and throw it in the chat. I tried to put the PowerPoint, but it wouldn't go through.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised just because of its size.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said, if I can go ahead and, who would I email that to if you want to have it available for people?
That can be emailed to me or to Dr. V, Veronica. I'm assuming I emailed you about the training, so my name's.
Oh, okay, so I have your stuff.
Yep.
Okay. All right, I'll do that.